one of the most interesting Munich Security Conferences I could attend in the past because of the current geopolitical actors and topics. There are rising geopolitical blocks around the world, and this is something companies need to consider when they think about investments, when they think about supply chains, and when they think about trade partners.
Thank you very much for joining us here at the Deloitte MSC launch and discussing with us the results of the Geoeconomic Dynamics Index 2025. So, in your perspective, what were the key takeaways that you gathered at our panel discussion?
I think the key takeaway is that globalization is under threat because of geopolitics, but we should not despair. The European economy is a very open one, so we are dependent on trade. We can do friendshoring, but we have to trade with other countries, and we have good companies, and I think we can be quite optimistic.
Given that we now have a very different geopolitical situation than in the last decade, for example, what do you think should companies do going forward to deal with those new pressures?
I think they should accept that there are insurance risk premia to pay if you want to do global business, because geopolitical risks have a price, and we have to accept this. And friendshoring can't compensate for a global strategy. And I think if companies do proper risk management, if they invest in understanding geopolitical risks, then they are well prepared.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So I'm welcoming Susanne Wiegand, CEO with large experience in defense industry in Germany and Europe. And we were lucky that you were joining our boardroom panel discussion today within our Deloitte lounge at the Munich Security Conference on the issue geopolitics and current challenges for top management in terms of corporate resilience, etc. And I want to ask you, what is your perspective, your experience in terms of getting a business resilient within all the challenges that we face, actually, risk and challenges around the geopolitical surrounding that we have currently?
Absolutely a challenge in these days. So the world is much more complex than before. My experience is that long-term planning doesn't exist anymore. We have much more discussions with our board on the management level and with the supervisory board on geopolitics, on how to make ourselves most resilient. This has to do with supply chains. This has to do with the assessment of regions. Where do we have business? Where do we have factories? How much shall things be connected or not connected? Which is then a debate also of more or less synergies for the sake of being much more agile and flexible with the entire setup.
Do you see any, last question, do you see any chances for more cooperation within Europe in terms of defense industry?
For sure, it's needed. Europe has to scale. Scaling in the rather decentralized, fragmented structure we have is slow, less affordable. There is room for consolidation. However, the situation that we get at the moment, more budgets, which we all appreciate in the industry, is not increasing the pressure for consolidation. So there is a little bit of counter effect, but for sure you see examples with system houses, the partnership between Rheinmetall and Leonardo, for example, or the construct of Airbus or an MBDA, where we have already European setups, or the company I was running until recently, RANK, is covering the entire European players. So we have RANK France, which is supplying. There is no competition left. There is already a certain level of consolidation, and this needs to continue to a sensible level, respecting always sovereignty and national interests of the various governments and countries. And this balance is a fine balance, difficult to find. But all of that, if you allow last sentence, we require for European joint efforts and acting in defense, also a harmonized export control regime.
Okay.
And this is one of the big obstacles and hurdles which we have to overcome.
Okay. So much more to do then. Thank you very much for joining us in our Deloitte Lounge today at Munich Security Conference, and wish you all the best, and thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I'm welcoming Dr. Jeanette zu Fürstenberg from General Catalyst, Managing Director for Europe. You've been taking part in our discussion today, in our panel discussion from the boardroom program on geopolitics and corporate resilience, current challenges for top management. And we were discussing a bit on AI, and maybe I raised that question in terms of the global competition on AI. What do you think is a potential chance for Europe in terms of technology development, AI development, given your experience you just had joining the AI Action Summit in Paris earlier this week with President Macron from France and Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President from Europe. What is your experience and your view on the chances of Europe in that context?
Yeah, so actually Europe has a huge opportunity with AI. I think it's for the first time that as Europe we are confronted with a digital technology that is not disruptive in nature, because it's not something that gives you access to new distribution, but is a technology that is inherently transformative, meaning it makes existing data and existing distribution more effective, more profitable, more productive. And that is inherently something that lends itself well to the archetype of European industry. So the big opportunity we have in Europe is to unlock the huge value creation that will happen at the application layer. That will happen from our leading industry companies and our global champions that we've built in Europe over the past decades, leaning into AI, adopting AI, and in that same context, creating a flywheel of innovation of a local ecosystem of AI providers. And I think what's meaningful to say and important to state is that most of the leading researchers in AI are actually European. We have a lot of incredible talent that is building technology here for this next generation of AI transformation. And I think the most important thing we need to understand is this is going to be so critical to Europe's infrastructure and our sort of new technology stack that we must build resiliency into Europe also from an industrial adoption perspective.
If we break it down to the individual businesses, from the perspective of individual businesses, what do you think is the most getting out of it from implementing AI to get more resilient as a business?
Well, I think what AI really gives you, first of all, it gives you a huge boost of productivity. And if you think about the fact that we've never seen GDP growth without population growth, and demographics plays a decisive role. I think all of us have a shortage of labor in Europe that's significant and that's going to be ever widening, then AI is the answer to that, right? So that's really the opportunity that we must lean into, and that's why there is so much potential for us to harness in terms of AI adoption that goes all the way from horizontal enterprise workflows to sort of more vertical specific sort of AI products that can be generated. And yeah, I can encourage you to read a report that we recently released on the subject called An Ambitious Agenda for European AI that actually highlights early examples of how AI is actually already unlocking value for some of Europe's world market leaders.
Okay. And final question, if you look at the discussions potentially between supervisory boards and executive on AI, what do you give as an advice to that group?
It has to become an absolute top issue for leaders. I think CEOs need to embrace the topic, they need to lean into the topic full on, they need to get informed, and they need to make sure that they drive adoption to the max and do that in a way that it addresses the biggest secular threats that they're experiencing to their companies. I think that's kind of the highest order bit we must lean into.
Thank you, Jeanette, for joining our Deloitte Lounge at the Munich Security Conference and our panel discussion.
Thank you so much.
Great to have you here. Bye-bye. So, Harald Krüger, please welcome today in our Deloitte Lounge at the Munich Security Conference. You've been recently joining our panel discussion of the boardroom program with your colleagues. We were talking about geopolitical surrounding and corporate resilience and all the challenges that you face around that. And as a very experienced executive, you've been CEO of BMW, a multinational automotive firm all over the world, very active, and then you've been joining as a non-executive director now at infrastructure-related companies like Deutsche Telekom and Lufthansa. So if you look into the current discussion that we had, what is the role of the geopolitical discussion and corporate resiliency in the boardroom discussions that you have currently and the discussions with the executive?
Yeah, it's top of the agenda, I would call it. Yeah, it's the number one item in these days. Geostrategic conflicts, geostrategic resilience. Yeah, just to give you one example for this one, yeah, looking at the supply chains, for example, yeah, are the supply chains resilient? Are they robust? Are there too much focus on single sourcing? Do you need a second source? So geostrategic conflicts and scenario B's in case something happens. Yeah, it must be not a war. It must be not something which can be customs or impacts from also other things like earthquakes or whatever. So that is top of the mind, especially if the corporate business model is resilient. And what can you do and what needs to be done even one level down in terms of sourcing strategy, in terms of market strategy, in terms of production network. Yeah, do you have a balanced strategy between sales and marketing and manufacturing? Okay. So that's in these days something which is on the one side the supervisory board is asking and challenging the board of management. And the board of management is working and thinking in scenarios and get advice as well as how resilient are our operations.
Would you say that given this, what you just described as a situation, that in the German governance model with the two-tier system of supervisory board and executive group, that the involvement of supervisory board into strategic discussions is currently more than in the past?
Definitely. Yeah. That's why some companies have a strategic workshop day in addition to the normal supervisory board meetings, where you discuss the trends, the changes, what can happen to your industry, what might be happening on the customer side, on the market side, on the technology side. Just thinking about digitalization in detail and digitalization strategies is sometimes such a big animal that you can't do it within one normal board meeting. So that is definitely in these days, even in German companies, much more higher on the agenda. But it's not just the strategic side, it's also the operational side, the execution side.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that AI, artificial intelligence, plays a role in corporate resilience in your discussions? Definitely.
And one item can be, for example, what can destroy your business if a competitor is having AI and is attacking you? Okay. Yeah? And the second question would be, can you generate more value, more revenue with AI on the market side, on the customer side? Or can you make, third question, with AI, your process is more efficient, less cost sensitive in terms of can you gain a productivity advantage? So all these three questions are still in mind and are on a daily basis nearly something I would call on board meetings.
Okay. Harold, thank you very much for joining us today in our panel discussion and here in my interview. And thank you for joining the Deloitte Lodge.
No, thanks for the invitation, and thanks for the interview.
After an inspiring panel on navigating through the AI era, I have three of my panelists here and give each of them 30 seconds to take away what they take away from this great panel. I start with Jonas.
So what I loved is that there's this joint sentiment that there's always been times where Europe had to find a new way, and the partnership with our friends had to be kind of reimagined. And some of the phenomenal companies that we have now, some of our current strength came out of that. And this can be a time like that again. And I think this is what I'm very optimistic about.
I can just echo that. I think what I took away and learned from the discussion, we need to bring the brightest minds from in the field of technology together to make sure we apply this powerful technology, AI, against the most critical, most important problems to make the world a better one.
What I take away is that we need a broader sense of security issues, and that means all the changes that are going to come from AI systems going to be like a tectonic shift, and it means that it needs to be embedded in political systems and society systems. So we need to have that broader sense of security, and I take that away.
Emma, we had just a very interesting panel on women in cyber and defense and the success that we can get out of it. So we discussed heavily also that it needs change. What does it really mean for you?
We had a really good discussion, and I think the need for change is really well understood. We know that from many studies, diverse workforces are far more effective. And I think we all agreed we need to take action. So this event today is about the things we can do to make change. It will take men and women, our whole organisations that need to make that change to create an effect in the future.
The change is something that can be long-term. Do you have something that you start tomorrow? Maybe?
Something short-term.
Short-term, there we go.
I mean, I think there are two things that can have an immediate effect. One is looking at our hiring practices. How do we start to remove some of the unconscious bias from hiring practices, such as gender-neutral language in job adverts, making sure there are more than one female candidate in the pipeline for interviews, and then really trying to do some maybe unconscious bias training with hiring managers. I also think that we could look at making an inclusive workforce and making the environment feel inclusive within our offices and our teams, and thinking about the steps we can take to make it really feel inclusive for everybody.
Emma, so the change is that we start tomorrow, but another question is, who brought you there? What inspired you and who made it possible that you are here where you are?
I mean, I've had so many inspirational role models through my career, from my parents and my grandparents who kind of inspiring me to do everything that I can in my career. I've had some amazing managers and amazing teams that I've worked with, and I've also had key sponsors throughout my career who've really encouraged me to stretch myself and go outside my comfort zone. And I think each of us can play that role for different people in our lives.
That's a very good point. Emma, thank you very much for being here in Munich with us and for the fruitful discussion. I wish you the best.
My pleasure, Peter. Thank you.